All right, so let's begin chapter 2. What we'll do, similar to what we did with chapter 1, we'll read through the Mishnah, and then we'll work our way back with some additional commentary. But we had worked through so many introductory things in the first chapter that the second chapter is good. We're going to see is going to move relatively smoothly. As we mentioned, the first chapter was so dense that so many things needed to be unpacked, that along the way we learned up so many ideas contained within Bava Kama. So the second chapter, I think we're going to find it move relatively smoothly. All right, let's begin. So we mentioned at the end of the last parak that the rule of thumb is that if the damage the animal does is a muad damage, the damage is something that's expected to be done. So then full compensation needs to be paid by the owner for the damage that's incurred. Versus if it was unexpected damage, so then you would only pay half damages. We had a whole discussion whether or not those half damages, it's that really in reality the Torah expects you to pay the whole that really in reality you would have had to pay the whole thing, but Hashem just has Rahmanas over the fact that you weren't expecting it, and therefore you only have to pay half. Or it's that in reality, no, because it was unexpected, you wouldn't have had to pay anything, and the Torah penalizes you because of the fact that even though it was unexpected, you're still responsible for your property to make sure you watch it. But regardless, then is that if it's expected, the damage, so then you have to pay the full amount. That's called a muad, versus if it's unexpected. And we said that with regards to the muad damages, it's really most of the damage we're talking about is expected. We said the 4 avos nazikin. We said the 4 avos nazikin are regel. We'll say is regel is the first one. That's where the animal is just acting in a normal fashion. It just is going about on its way, and it walks on something, it bumps into something, and it breaks it. So then that is something that's expected. The animal's just expected to do its thing, right? Number 2 is shane, where the animal eats something, right? So it does something that's, as we explained, that's derech hanaso. It does something for its own benefit. So that also that's something expected, right? Animals are primitive beings. They just act when they're hungry, they eat, right? And they don't ask whose tomato garden it is. They just eat the tomatoes.
In terms of halacha, all of this could be extrapolated to other types of issues, right?
Oh, certainly.
Okay.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Relate to animals, right?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, without question. Yes, for sure. And then we said boar and aish. Obviously, you need to watch your hazards. And then the third one related to animals we said was keren, where the animal gores, right? So there, when it acts aggressively like that, so depending on the animal, that we said that we saw machlokas at the end of the parak about are there some that they agree that there are some animals that are objectively dangerous, and that objectively they are aggressive, and therefore, right, for example, everybody agreed a snake is something that you just have to expect it to cause damage, right? So if someone owns a snake and causes damage, no matter what, it's going to be considered muad. It would have been expected a full amount. We saw machlokas about what about something like a lion, right, where it can be tamed, but so does that put it enough in the category of it being unexpected damage that you'd only have to pay half damages if it causes any sort of damage on somebody? But then in general, that the animal is either an animal that is qualitatively a dangerous animal, it's expected to do damage, or it's that the animal has just itself on a micro level become an animal that is an aggressive animal, that the type of animal may not be an aggressor, but the animal themselves became an aggressive animal. Like I had a good friend of mine growing up who had a really crazy cat. It would just bite and scratch people. It's just a very crazy cat. My cat, when I was growing up, he didn't have a care in the world. Didn't, it was a very calm animal, right? And it's like most cats, right? You're not expect the cat to just like bite you or scratch you, and you walk past it. Usually, but their cat was just crazy. So so their cat may have become a muad, but most cats don't, right? So, but we said that if the animal acts in an aggressive manner 3 times, so then that already 3 strikes and you're out. You're already considered to be a muad. The animal has now become an aggressive animal. Okay. Now the Mishnah, coming off the heels of that, begins to discuss each of these cases. Ketzad haregel muedes. How does an animal become a muad with regard to regel? Which again, we said regel is its normal activity. Walks around, it bumps into things, okay? So how does it become muad, which means that the damage is expected? So says the Mishnah that the animal is already considered a muad l'shaber b'derech hilucha, to break things while it's walking. Habehemu muedes l'halech kidarka l'shaber, that an animal is considered a muad to walk around and break things with its body. Okay, like we said, right? You expect the animal to walk around and do its thing, and therefore it's going to already be considered a muad just from walking around and doing its thing. Next, the Mishnah continues and brings up cases where the animal does damage with its feet. Well, it's a regel, but it's not a muad, that it's not expected. Says the Mishnah the following: Haisa mab'etes, if it was kicking. Now this is open to major discussion over here. Major discussion. I saw it's a whole discussion from Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach over here that mab'etes, kicking. How would we categorize kicking? Would we categorize it under regel? I know it's kicking with its feet, but would we put it under regel? How did we define regel? Categorically, what is regel? Well, the animal
normally walking
acts in its normal manner. How did we label aggression? Under which of the avos nazikin? Under which of the categories? Karen. Karen is aggression. So kicking is aggression, right? So there's a whole discussion. Like I said, why is kicking in the discussion of regel? It should be in the discussion of Karen, right? That's what it should be. So Shlomo Zalman writes the following. He says, we find in other places, right? We just saw in the previous Mishnah, the end of the last parak of the first parak. Told us the Karen. It includes it in Karen, which is the animal acting it with an aggressive manner, not regel.
Maybe the Mishnah is not talking about regel as damage, but regel as feet.
But if that was the case, so then the first scenarios it brought up wouldn't have made sense.
Walking?
That's not aggressive.
No, but it's with its feet.
Meaning regel just means damage. It can be done by feet. It's not talking about the category of damage, but it's not talking about the category of damage. Okay, all right, interesting. I find that hard to believe because generally speaking, when we find regel, it's not referring to the physical part of the body. It's referring to, right, which right, for example, the animal is walking around and just bumps into something. It didn't do damage with its feet, right? Its feet got it there, but it did the damage with its body, right? But nevertheless, it's including in a regel, right? Usually we're talking about it not as a physical attribute, but
at a category of damage.
At a category of damage, right? So So okay, but it's possible. It's possible. So he says imkein tzarich beer. You need to understand this. My time at Tani Lahacha Bahadi told us the regel. Why is it that we're including it over here in the discussion about regel? So he says that it seems like Tosfos already is Omer al Zeh, already discusses this. And he gives and he says that that this could be an example. He gives basically two answers. He says that this could be an example where, remember, Rebbe's goal here is not to give us a code of Jewish law, right? It's supposed to be an outline to halachic discussion, right? To a discussion within Torah Shabbal Peh. So this could very well be a good example of that, where Rebbe is specifically bringing up a scenario of a Karen type of damage that happens with feet, like Charlie was saying. I think maybe Charles is giving this answer, that it brought up an aggressive type of damage in order so that you could say, hold on, that's Regel? No, that should be Karen, right? In order so you can actually have that discussion, Rebbe brought it down like that. Okay, so that could be.
Well, how about for example, Shane biting?
Right, so biting also is something that, depending on the type of biting it's doing,
right, exactly.
It's either be put under Karen or. And by the way, there's a major practical implication as to whether or not it's Karen or Regel, right. In that how much you have to pay if it was within the first 3 times, right? Major distinction between the two, right? The other answer he gives is based off of Tosfos Rabbeinu Peretz, that perhaps we're going to get to soon something that a damage that is Regel damage, that was damage that happened with the animal's feet while it was going about its normal way, but it was a more severe type of damage. And there, the Mishnah is going to tell us that since it was unexpected, so there you only have to pay half the damages. And because of the fact that we're about to discuss that case, we'll discuss in a second, called Sroros, that because we're going to discuss that case, so the Mishnah brings up this case of mab'etes, of biting, because it would fall into the same category. So again, another example of Rebbe just sticking something into a Mishnah that doesn't necessarily belong there. It's not 100% clear, but it's coming in order so we can have these halachic discussions. So let's continue over here. So haisa mab'etes, if it was kicking, o shahayu tzroros, or there were pebbles that minatzin mitachas ragleha, that were flying out from under its feet while it was walking around normally. Okay, so that is a case of Regel, right? The animal's walking around normally, right? And it walks along a path that has pebbles, and the animal, it kicks up its feet like you see a dog do, right? A dog, likes to dig, right? So as the dog is, kicking with its, hind legs, it's sending all these pebbles flying behind it, right? And it could do some serious damage, right? That's more than just, animal walks, so that could be serious damage, right? V'shibra es hakelim, and it broke the utensils, it broke the objects. Mishalim chatzi nezek. Says the Mishnah, you only have to pay half damages. Now, why would you only have to pay half damages for throwers? Why would we think that?
It's an abnormal situation.
Because it's an abnormal situation. Why is that abnormal? Well, I mean, it depends on how you define it. You can define it as abnormal. It all depends on the animal.
That's what a dog does. It buries his bones.
It's not something that fits into your responsibility for the animal. I mean, it's that unexpected.
Right. So that's what I would have thought, except for the fact that the act is expected, like Harvey was saying, right? Like you do expect the animal to do that.
So then why would you have?
So why would you only have to pay half? So here, this is a special halacha, says the Gemara in Daf Yud Zayin. This says this is a special halacha that cheti nezek tzroros, that paying half damages for these flying pebbles, is halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is a unique scenario where there is a din, a halacha in civil law that is outside the realm of logic. This breaks the rules, and it's simply because it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. This is basically like a chok, right? It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It comes straight from Har Sinai that this is the halacha, that if it's tzroros, if it's the pebbles are flying from under its feet, so that is something that you only have to pay half damages, and it's a halacha. It's halacha l'Moshe Sinai. It's a tradition that comes from Har Sinai that's the halacha. So it kind of breaks the rules a little bit, but nevertheless, it's a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. That's the halacha. Okay, so because of the fact that we brought up this scenario, so therefore it also brings up the kicking scenario. That's what Rav Shlomo Zalman wanted to say based off Rabbeinu Peretz. Okay, good. Now we're up to the next part of the Mishnah. So what we've come to now is we have the following. We have that if the animal is acting in its normal fashion and along it doing its normal thing, it breaks something, so then you have to pay the full damages. You should be responsible to make sure you launch your animal properly. That's called the muad, and because it's expected, and if there's a specific scenario of chetzi nezek tzroros, you only have to pay half damages for the pebbles flying. So that's a special dispensation from a halacha l'Moshe Sinai. Okay, let's continue in the Mishnah. Darsa al hakli vishibraso, if it's walking on a vessel and it broke it, v'nafal hakli vishibro, or it fell on a vessel and it broke it.
No,
So
it
then
did say the shard hit another vessel.
darsa al hakli vishibro, and it broke it. V'nafal hakli vishibro.
Well, Norfolk is masculine, so it can't be that.
Oh, v'nafal. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, the nafal al hakli v'shibro, and the shards. Yeah, the vessel itself flew out and broke something else. Al rishon mashalim nezik shalim. So in the first scenario where the animal tramples on the object, you have to pay full damages. But in the second case, that would be a case similar to tzroros, right? That the vessel flew and damaged another thing. So then there, again, that's just like the tzroros, right? It's like the pebbles flying from under its feet and causing damage. You don't have to pay half damages in that
makes more
scenario.
sense, though, right? Makes a little more sense.
That's the same. Well, it's the same thing.
Well, he fell on the object and broke it. That's to be expected, I suppose, right?
Okay.
Right,
But
so
the
you pay full
shard,
damage.
But then the
But the
shard
shard
flew
is
out.
More of a
So that's the same.
random event.
Why? It's no different
Is
than
it
the what's it called? Than the animal kicking up the pebbles.
Yeah.
Right? Okay. All right, let's continue. Hatarna golem. What about birds? Like chickens. So the Mishnah says, Mu'adin lahalech kedarkan lishaber. They are expected to do damage by walking around in its normal fashion, and bumping into things and the like. Hayadalil kashur baraglo. However, if there was something tied to the animal's leg, oshahaya mahades, or if it was hopping around, on page 22, umashper es hakelim, and it broke the vessels, and it broke something. Either the thing attached to its leg caused damage, or as the Bartanur explains, or it was the pebbles flying out from the chicken's feet. So then Mashalim Chatzinezik, that's another example of only having to pay half damages.
So anytime an animal uses a tool, you only pay half.
Anytime the animal uses a tool,
Yeah, he's using the pebbles as a tool. And it could be that there are other things they.
what do you mean? So like if you attached a yoke onto an animal and it and the yoke caused damage, I don't think so. Yeah, I don't think
The animal
so.
causes damage
I don't know.
with the yoke.
Yeah, that's a good
Well,
question.
It almost seems like it should be the opposite. You would pay, is it?
Fair.
Somebody had to put that tool, so to speak, right on the
Right.
chicken's leg. The owner or somebody had to participate in that damage to some extent. Somebody had to participate.
Well, we're supposed to keep our chickens away from other people's stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, that's true too.
Yeah. Well, it happens to be, it's a machlokas over here. Whether or not the chickens were chosen as the example here because they're the most common
They're domesticated.
birds, right? The domesticated, right? That are, or
And they can't fly.
and they can't fly, or does this include all birds? Or does this include all birds? Yeah. Okay. All right, let's continue. Next Mishnah. Let's get to the next Mishnah. All right, good. All right, let me just see if there was something else I wanted to bring up over here. Hold on.
Oh, there's a commentary that relates to damage by a yoke.
Mhm.
It says anything attached to the animal. Does something have damage because it's the pebbles, not the bird itself, or anything attached to it?
Right, we learned from Toros that anything that is not attached to the
Yeah.
animal itself.
So if you attach the yoke to the animal and it damages or something.
The yoke damages something, that yeah, you only have to pay half of that scenario. Right.
You attach that something to the animal. That's what bothers me. You contributed.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Again, it's a halacha Moshe Messinai, the chatzin as a Toros. Okay.
Why do they have to bring up 3 cases and where pebbles cause damage?
I was just thinking the same thing.
What's
I was
the
just thinking
difference?
that-
Why do they need all 3 cases?
I was just thinking the same thing, Charlie.
Yeah.
I was just thinking the same thing.
Probably the Gemara gets into this. But
Yeah, let me see over here 1 second. Because I thought I saw something that related to that. Give me a second. Okay, we'll have to get back to that. Let's do the next Mishnah. Okay, so Ketzad Hashain Muedes. So now we get to the next category of damage, right? We're talking about shane, which is where the animal causes damage through the course of eating, meaning that it does something for its own benefit. So it says the Mishnah, Ketzad Hashain Muedes. How does the category of shane become muad, where it's expected damage? What would be an example of that? Le'echol es haroila, the animal to eat that which you expected to eat. An animal is expected to eat fruits and vegetables. Therefore, in that scenario, you'd have to pay full damages. Okay, but if the animal ate clothing or something like that, so then you only pay half the damage because it's not expected, and therefore it'd be put onto the category of Karen in that scenario. Okay, so again, so this, for example, like shoes. If the animal starts, chewing on someone's shoes or something, right? The dog starts chewing on shoes. So in that scenario, you'd only have to pay half damages because that's something that is it's something it's not normal. It's not normal activity, right? So you pay half damages unless it happens more than 3 times.
Except for a dog, it is pretty much normal.
Puppy, maybe.
And maybe a puppy, right? So maybe a puppy is considered a muad until it gets older. Yeah.
So
Maybe
if,
it's-
if an animal is being fed by the owner directly, like hand to mouth, is
Yeah.
that considered?
Well,
Is that
little dog chewing on. stuff
Well,
like
that's something that,
That's when it's playing, not really when it's eating.
right,
Ah, that's fine.
yeah,
Playing, not eating.
yeah, but wait, so what's your question, Jay?
If an animal is being fed, not just in a bowl or whatever, throwing stuff on the ground, but if the owner feeds it by his hand into
Yeah.
the mouth and the animal bites the owner accidentally, not intending to.
Yeah, so that again, not the owner, we're talking about he damaged someone else, right?
Well, yeah,
So
yeah,
someone is feeding
yeah, that's what I
the,
mean.
yeah, so that's a good question. I think that would, I think that would probably, I don't think that you would be liable in that scenario at all, actually. I don't think the owner would be liable at all. Because there, it's kind of like damage happening on my property, right? If someone comes to my house and I have a Rottweiler, they're coming at their own risk. Okay. So I think it's the same idea where even if I'm at someone else's house and, they let me bring my dog there and they want to feed my animal, right? They're sticking their hand in the animal's mouth, right?
Right.
So they're kind of like,
Yeah,
they're declaring basically that they're fine with whatever, taking the risk. Yeah. All right, let's continue. So Bamed Dvar Mamurim. So now says the Mishnah, related to what Jack's question was, says the Mishnah, what case does Shane apply? Bershus Haniza. So it only applies if the animal ate something that was in the domain of the victim. Aval Bershus Harab and Putter, but if it ate in the public domain, right? Someone just left out their tomatoes out in the middle of the street, right? And my animal comes along and starts eating them, so that I'm not going to be held responsible for that. Im nehenis mishalim mashenehenis. However, if the animal ate, let's say, an amount that would give it benefit, so then I have to pay the amount that would be considered for the animal's benefit. Any additional damage that occurred, I don't have to pay for. But if it's something that was directly beneficial to my animal,
Buying the food, essentially.
right, exactly. So like, for example, if the animal's, is, puts its head into a whole vat of tomatoes, right? So it could squish the other tomatoes around and right. And everything else that's happening to the tomatoes is not going to be my problem. The only thing I'm going to be responsible for is just what my animal actually ate, what it's digesting. Okay.
Knocks over the container.
Knocks
get
over the
in.
container to get in, right? Something
Yeah.
like that, right? There, I'm not going to be responsible for any of that because it's your problem. You left it in the middle of the Rishus Harabim. But what my animal got benefit from, though, then I do have to pay only for that which he got benefit, what he got benefit from. That's the way the Rambam explains it. Okay. Kate, now the Gemara explains that a little bit further. Kate's a mashalim mashanehanis. So how does one pay for the benefit? How do you figure that out? Achla mitoch herchava mishalim mashanehanis. If it ate in the middle of the street, it pays. You have to pay for what you benefited. But if it was on the side of the street, meaning it was tucked away, it wasn't like out in the middle of the street, but it was somewhere private, right? It just not really private. It was in a public place, but something that was, off to, it's like kind of saying like, I'm not going to be responsible for, it's like, it would be similar to, when you go to so you go to the beach, right? So you go to the beach and someone left their stuff on their on their beach chair, right? In the middle of public property, right? And they took a beach chair from the, but it's in the middle of public property, right? So on the one hand, you could say, well, that's the middle of public property. It shouldn't be my fault if my animal goes over and starts digging their way through your stuff. But on the other hand, no, like that's the nature of the beach, is that there are certain, quote unquote, private, reserved areas, right? Like this is my spot, right? So if it's a scenario like that, the Mishnah is saying, so then I'd have to pay for all the damage that's incurred that scenario, because that's the nature of it, that I need to watch the animal in such scenarios. But if it's mamish in the middle of the street, so then I'm not going to be responsible in that scenario. Okay.
So it sounds like the owner is required to walk his animal in the middle of the street.
No, not necessarily. It's responsible to watch the animal.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Let's just finish the Mishnah, and then I have to get to the next class. All right, so here's a similar halacha over here. If the animal, right, there's food out in like these busy city markets, right? So the animal, the food is all on display out in the open, right? So when you're walking your
But
dog,
it's not in the middle of the street, it's at the edge of the street.
it's on the side, right? The animal is walking along, right? You can't just say like, oh, it's the middle of the street. It's it's not my problem. No, that's ridiculous, right? Oh no, I'm sorry. No, I said it wrong. I'm sorry. In that scenario where there is stuff, it's a marketplace like that, and there's stuff, out like that. So then the store owner is taking risk by leaving it out like that, and therefore I'm only going to be responsible to pay. Not that I'm allowed to allow the animal to go and eat from it, but if it does, I'm only responsible to pay for that which it benefited from, because the fact that the animal kind of took on a reasonable risk by laying all the food out like that. But let's just finish the Mishnah. However, if it goes into the store property and it starts eating from it, you have to pay that which it damaged, not only that which it ate. Okay.
What if the owner put up a sign, no dogs allowed?
Well, no, it's not made. It might not be up to him. He's in a.
You're saying it's for Shu Sarabin.
When you at the Kollel, I'll give you a good example of this. You go to the Kollel.
If you were alive 60 years ago,
Yeah.
when stores
No, I
used
understand
to
what
put
you're saying.
their wares
It's
out in front
It's
of
not
the
private
store.
property.
Right. When you go when
It's not private property.
it's not private property. Yeah, it's not private property, right? Like like when you're walking to the Kollel, if you recall that there's always those the Arab vendors. They sell the different kinds of breads and things like that, right? It's mamish in the middle of the street. Mamish in the middle of the street, right? So I mean, what's the person gonna say if my animal, I look away for 1 second, the animal starts sniffing around and right? Like that's not my problem, right? I can't be right. Like, I'm walking around, I'm having it on a leash, I'm making sure it's not hurting anybody, right? And then you're just leaving out these delicious looking treats everywhere, right? What's the animal supposed to do, right? But if it's mamish, they also have it's mamish, like it's tucked away storefront that the animal is, I'm so irresponsible. I actually let the animal go along and actually either go into the store, close into the store, and actually is able to get things out of the store like that. So that's a problem. Then I really would have to pay for all the damages. All right, good. We'll discuss more, God willing, on Monday. All right. Very good. All right. Good, guys.